All right. Um, when I get into this a little bit further, I want to ask a question, some questions of the audience, but I thought it would be very useful. I try to start out a lot of the presentations I do on anything digital with some basics on digital because this applies no matter whether you're doing D-Star, DMR, Fusion, any of those, and even some digital data modes as well. And I think understanding that kind of goes a long way in getting people interested in doing some of these digital modes. First off, we're doing digital voice. The voice is actually converted to data. So we're converting our analog voice into a stream of ones and zeros. Now, on top of that, we can add more pure data, for example, like text files, pictures, anything like that. You can add it to that voice, but it still produces a single data stream containing both the voice and data. And if you listen to that on the air, it sounds like a buzzy hiss, as the best way I can describe it. So if you're listening to a digital voice or a digital signal on an FM radio, that's generally what you may hear. You may think it's interference, QRM or something, but it's actually you're listening to a digital output from a repeater or another radio. So the radio is modulated. It's a data carrier. That's what you hear. Now the occupied bandwidth. Let's talk about that. You understand what occupied bandwidth? How much space does this signal take up on the spectrum itself? And that's determined by a couple of factors. One of them is the data rate that you're using. The higher the data rate, the wider the signal. And then also the type of modulation. Different ones, as you'll see in the next bullet, different modulation schemes have different bandwidths. But generally, what you're going to see is that a digital voice and data will occupy a lot less than your standard FM analog signal, which is around 10 to 15 kilohertz. And what you'll see is from around 6.25 kilohertz, which is the occupied bandwidth, and that's also the FCC emission for that designation for that is 6.25 kilohertz. Now you go up just a little bit more is DMR, and it's at 7.6. And then Fusion is the widest of all at 9.36 kilohertz. And these are all published numbers. But in all cases, they're a lot less than your standard FM at 10 to 15 kilohertz. So digital voice especially tends to be a lot more efficient than your standard FM. In the long term, as more and more repeaters and radios go digital, you've got an opportunity to refarm the spectrum. Whether that'll happen in any of our lifetimes, I don't know. People get pretty entrenched. We're still using 1970s and 80s radios on repeaters. So I doubt that we'll see this anytime soon to be able to fit more in. Because I remember from my days as a Southeast Repeater Association vice director for Georgia, an officer, that there are no open repeater pairs in the Atlanta area on 2 meters. In fact, there are no open 2 meter repeater pairs from Chattanooga to below Macon. Now, is everyone using all these very efficiently and they're busy? No, not really, but that's the way it is. So just keep in mind the main concept here is that uh, any of the digital modes are going to be much more spectrally efficient than you'll see with our standard FM today. Now, this is one of the things I want to make a point on. I'll get to that. Uh, the short answer is 2 meters, 70 centimeter, and up. So we'll go over that in more detail. All right, here's the thing to understand about a digital signal. Think about today your FM signal. As you get weaker, what happens? You start getting white noise, you start getting static until the signal gets so weak that the noise is louder than the voice and you can't hear that. So the green line here is your typical analog signal. So as the signal gets weaker, as it goes to the right, it gets less and less readable that you're seeing on the vertical scale. Now, here's where digital differs in that. And this doesn't matter, again, whether it's D-Star, DMR, Fusion. There's generally forward error correction on the signal. And as long as you have enough signal that it can reproduce and change those data bits back to voice, you get a good solid signal. As we like to say, full quieting. Ralph was telling me at dinner tonight that he's just started experimenting because he's got a new radio that will do fusion. So he said everything sounds like it's just full quieting right there. But that's your typical digital signal. And it's going to stay that way until you get out into almost no signal. And because of forward error correction and other things that applied to it, it is able to reproduce that signal faithfully. And if you look at the point where it just really drops off the cliff, if you compare that to the green line for analog, you're down almost in a noisy, unreadable signal level at that point. So the question always comes up: why am I'm not hitting? I'm not hitting the repeater. I'm not getting through. Well, what you don't know is whether you have a weak signal or not. You probably have a very weak signal as a reason you're not able to get into the repeater. You know, you might have some other things not set up correctly, but as a general rule, it'll either be great. You do have that kind of no man's land where it falls off pretty sharply. Some people refer that to as R2D2, a warbling sound, whatever you want to name you want to put on it, where it can't quite reproduce and change that back to an analog signal. It doesn't have enough signal to be able to do that. So these are some important things to think about on digital. Now, the question always comes up: which travels further, a digital signal or an analog signal? Now, um, what's your opinion, Steve? All the rules of physics apply no matter whether you're digital or analog. So, my typical answer to which one performs better is it depends. Now, that's a very definite answer, but what I'm really saying is in certain conditions, digital will be better. In certain conditions, analog will travel further. So, bottom line is it's about the same. You're not going to really get a benefit one way or the other. The thing to remember is you'll get a cleaner signal longer until you can't, till you fall off that cliff at the end. So it may give you the impression that you're going further because the comparable analog signal would be a lot weaker and noisier. Okay. Any questions on that? But that's kind of a basic concept no matter what it is. Mm-hmm. That's that's true. Your path balance and your path budgets are different on each, whether you're transmitting or receiving. Any questions on this part, Bob? Yes. It doesn't do the packet repeat like packet ARQ. It is it's forward error correction. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about what makes up a D-Star signal. So, just to dive into D-Star specifically, it's a standard and it's an open standard. For years, people said, "Oh, it's proprietary," but it's not. It was developed jointly by Japan Amateur Radio League, which is kind of like our FCC and ARL rolled into one in Japan, along with the manufacturers ICOM and Kenwood. They developed that. It probably goes back to the mid 2000s when that was developed. D-Star is one of several digital modes that are used in amateur radio. I mentioned the three major ones: D-Star, DMR, and System Fusion. Those are the three. They all use a version of the AMBE vocoder chip, and that's from a company called DVSI, who's kind of the leader in the process of converting analog speech back to voice, digital voice and data. So they're kind of the pioneers in that. And almost any of the digital radios have a form of the DVSI AMBE chip within them. That's a small portion of the cost of a radio. I think in mass quantities like the manufacturers have, that is probably less than $25 on the cost of the radio. Today, you see D-Star radios that are manufactured by two of the major um, equipment producers, Japanese producers, ICOM and Kenwood. And all of the radios in D-Star, like DMR, I think is very comparable to that. And well, I think Fusion also. They do both FM and then their particular digital mode. Now, the thing that's crazy in all this, and this goes back to, I think, a Japanese culture thing, that when one of the major manufacturers comes out with a standard, the other ones say, well, I can't do that one. I gotta do something different. And so they all did. So D-Star was one of the early ones. DMR was really out there, but it was a European public safety standard is where it came from. And then Hams brought it over to the US, but it was already being used in public safety by Motorola under the trade name Moto Turbo. And then one of the latter entries into the digital voice mode was Yaesu with System Fusion. So specifically, what can D-Star do? And this gets back to Bob's question a little bit. You can transmit voice and 1200 baud data. Not real fast by today's standards, but it is that you can do that simultaneously. And you can do that. Most of the D-Star radios are dual band, 2 meter and 70 centimeter. They have built-in data interface, so you really don't have to use a TNC to do that. Now, that's not APRS, but it is able to put data into the radio with really only 3 connections: transmit data, receive data, and ground. Now, you can get higher speeds. 128 kilobit has been around on the 1.2 gig band. There's been radios. In fact, the very first D-Star radio was a 1.2 gigahertz radio that came out 2007, 2008, somewhere in that time frame. Since then, there's been some other radios, like the ICOM 9700 does 2 meter, 70 centimeter, and 1.2 gigahertz at higher power. And now ICOM developed a couple of years ago the ICOM's 905, and it goes up into the microwave up as high as 10 gigahertz, and you can actually transmit amateur television on that as well. I talked about the data capability. So instead of APRS, we call it DPRS. It's an automatic position reporting system that will go along with your voice and then is decoded and fed to the APRS network through most D-Star repeaters. So if you're running the digital mode, because most radios have a GPS receiver in them, your position, if you're transmitting that, can get gated to the APRS network, and you can view that on the aprs.fi website. You can transmit pictures, and that's one of the things that was done. You don't have to, I think Yaesu in their first radios could do pictures, but you had to use their camera connected to it. I don't think DMR does pictures per se, but you can do short messaging data with that. There are several picture nets in Georgia, well, in Georgia and nationally, so that people are practicing sending pictures. I know there's at least 3 nets in Georgia where repeaters are connected together and people practice sending photos. So in a sense, it's kind of like slow scan TV because you're sending a still picture of that. But there are nets that people are practicing doing that because that can be very helpful. In fact, I go back and Aries, we sent some pictures of during an SET, simulated emergency test. And one of the things we discovered in that, we kept saying, we were supposed to be reading stream gauges. Now, this was during a drought period, but EMA was having us practice that. So they said, go read this stream gauge. We can't get there. There's a concrete barrier across the road. We can't get there. EMA has pictures they pay for, photos around the whole county. And they said, our pictures don't show that. So we had someone with a D-Star radio take a picture, send it. We received it in the EMA, in the EOC, and showed that there's this concrete barrier across that. So that really helped cement digital voice and data as a part of emergency communications around. Now, what's different about it in that you can operate simplex. You just change the mode. So I can take two D-Star radios and operate simplex, mobile and portable, whatever, any combination. And there's where I don't need a repeater. I don't need the internet. I don't need anything to do that. Or I can go through repeaters. Now, the repeater itself is going to act just like a repeater. Now, I can send pictures to everyone on that, or send data to everyone on that repeater. But then we add the internet connectivity to it, which several of the digital modes are now allowing, and you can link repeaters over a much wider area. Now, in D-Star, we call those reflectors. Bob? Yes, it's simplex, just like you're on 5.2 simplex. Repeater is going to use a repeater pair, just like any repeater. Well, there's a handshaking that goes on, but you can't run D-Star through an analog repeater, if that's what you're asking. Well, there is a handshaking in the protocol. They all have to have that said, did I receive what you sent me? It does. It still works on simplex as well. Mm-hmm. Because the protocol says I'm transmitting to you. Did you receive it? Transferring back and forth. So you can operate both simplex or through repeaters, and then you can link the repeaters together to form a wider network. And then now we have the addition of hotspots. And hotspots have pretty much infiltrated all of the digital modes and allow you, if you're not within range of a repeater, you can still access the digital network, talk around the world through that. We'll talk more about hotspots in a minute. Reflectors. You call them reflectors in D-Star, and they're acting like a conference bridge. It's a way to bridge several repeaters together through the internet. And there's different flavors of that. One of the most popular ones is was actually designed by someone here in Atlanta, Robin Cutshaw, AA4RC. And he has what's called the D plus reflectors, and there's 98 of those located around the world, and they're very, very busy. We have one in Georgia dedicated to Georgia use, and it's reflector 3003. And you generally have most of the D-Star repeaters in Georgia connected to what we call reflector 3 alpha, 3A, at any point in time to create kind of a statewide network. There are others that have a different flavor. For example, reflector 1 Charlie, 001C, is kind of a worldwide, and it is I was checking with Robin this week, it is the busiest reflector in the world. And at any one time, you might have 100 repeaters, you might have 800 hotspots connected to it, and a bunch of people listening around the world. Reflector 30C or 30 Charlie is also a very busy one. That one is paid for by our Georgia group, the hosting on that one, but it's like number one or number two on any given day. Now, the thing I like about D-Star is because I can control what I link to from my radio. I'm not dependent on what the repeater says it can connect to. I can, from my radio, connect and disconnect and move between reflectors. So what I say is that I can do the linking from my radio. I don't have to program anything really any different for that. I just link to a particular reflector. And there's a list of these reflectors out on, I'll refer to this site several times. It's called dstarinfo.com, dstarinfo.com. It is it's done by one of our GARS members, actually, Ed Woodrick, WA4YIH. And he put this site together, and there are several things that it does, but one of them is you have a list of all of the reflectors and some information about them. So if you want to know, is there a reflector that kind of links all the repeaters in Southern California together? Okay, you can find that out on there. It's a reflector 12 Charlie. What's the worldwide one? Okay, reflector 1 Charlie. So you can find out that information and a list of reflectors on that site. You're going to hear me use that website, dstarinfo.com, quite a bit during this discussion because it's got so much information out there. And now hotspots, we'll dig into hotspots a little deeper, but it's kind of like Echolink in that, you know, you now do Echolink from your phone if you have the app. A hotspot, and I've got one on the table right there that, Ralph, you'd hold that white one up. That's an OpenSpot 4 Pro. It's a hotspot. So when my radio can talk to that hotspot and then connected through to the internet through my cellular hotspot there, cellular modem. And so I can access the worldwide D-Star network through that hotspot. That's similar to the other digital modes that you can link to different talk groups on DMR, or you can connect to rooms on Fusion. So the hotspots is something that's come along that you're not going to have as many digital repeaters. I don't care which flavor of digital voice, you're not going to have as many digital repeaters as you do FM repeaters. Now that's today. 10 years from now, we'll see how that changes, but there's more and more and more and more. But you probably only have about maybe, I'm going to take a guess, 15 to 20% of the total repeaters are digital voice active. So that's my guess on that. Now, let me talk about some features of D-Star radios themselves. This is an example of one. This is the ICOM ID52A. You have them in mobiles and handheld radios as well. Most of the radios, especially everything that's been produced probably in the last 12 or 13 years, have internal GPS. Now, how's that used? Number one, I know my position. I can display my coordinates or Maidenhead grid or whatever on my radio because it knows where that radio is. It's got a GPS receiver inside. I can use that to find nearby repeaters because there are databases. In fact, one comes pre-programmed in the radio. You go to HRO, order one from Gigaparts, wherever, DX Engineering, radio comes in. There's an internal database of D-Star repeaters, and in some models, even FM repeaters worldwide. And those repeaters locations are geocoded, meaning we know where they are, lat and long. The GPS in my radio knows where it is, so I can calculate what's the nearest repeater or the nearest 10 repeaters to me from where I am. A lot of that is stored on a micro SD card that is a part of the radio. There's internal memory, and then you can have the micro SD card that can store additional memories, additional configuration, repeater lists, GPS locations, and you can even store voice like QSOs, et cetera. And the current models all have a built-in data interface, or even some of them have an internal sound card for doing digital modes as well. So a lot of different models have different features. This is a list of the D-Star repeaters in Georgia. Pretty good list, but there's over 350 repeaters in Georgia. I know that from the Sarah days. This is not 300 repeaters, but there are 30 to 40 repeaters in Georgia. So about 10, 15% are out there and cover a good part of the state, and new ones are coming on all along. So you can see this list, and you can go to places like Repeater Book, or you can even go on, I'll say it again, dstarinfo.com to look up repeaters and find them. Any questions so far? Yes, sir. You said it well. There are people, in fact, you can use a Raspberry Pi with some special software and be able to create, you can emulate the D-Star protocol. So it is open source, and that's why there's been a lot of third-party applications that have been developed for it. You know, ICOM came out with some basic repeater, we call it gateway software, but then a lot of other people have come out with ones that'll run on another computer or a Raspberry, even a Raspberry Pi. So it is open source, and you can, and the code is published. So it's available. Good question. Because that was one of the early things that people said about D-Star. It's proprietary. Well, no, it isn't, because there's a lot of third-party applications that have been developed for it. All right, now to get on D-Star, it's pretty simple. You can, if you buy a radio, open it up, you got a charged battery. The first thing you do is program your call sign into the radio. Why do I do that? Because that is transmitted every time you transmit, your call sign goes along with it. Now, I use this example. Ralph kids me all the time because I say this in the ham crams. If you are a repeater kerchunker, you probably don't want to get on D-Star because every time you transmit, everybody sees your call sign. So it's displayed on all the radios. It's received at all times. Now, that's a little different than some of the others. I think Fusion also, you program your call sign. DMR, because its roots go back to public safety standards, you don't have a call sign associated with it. You have a radio ID. And people have been very creative to create contact lists, which translate that radio ID to a call sign. So you get some of the same things, but on a D-Star radio, you program it directly into your radio is one of the first steps that you do. Excuse me. What I would advise is turn on your internal GPS. It's in the menu system. Turn it on. Either be outside or be at a place that you can get a satellite lock. So now you've got a radio. It knows who you are, and it knows where you are. So I don't have to do any other programming. I'm going to select DR mode, which is a button on the radio. And then I can select nearest repeater, and that's going to give me a list of the 10 closest repeaters to me. I can select one of those. It's going to set up my radio with frequency, offset, all that information that it needs from that internal database. And then I can talk. Distance, on distance. Yeah. It doesn't know whether that's a 1-watt repeater or a 100-watt repeater, but it is going to give them in order by distance. The closest repeater first, the 10th is the furthest one. So that's all it takes for me to get on. Now, that assumes I've got a repeater in my area. If you don't and you have a hotspot, we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But so it's real simple. I've already got that internal database of repeaters, and it'll program my radio for me. So now, if I don't want to do it, and here's what's amazing to me. I've been giving D-Star presentations for about 15 years now, maybe longer than that. People still, when I say, do you use DR mode? There's a lot of people who go, and they want to program everything in there manually. You can do that. I have very little programmed in my radio itself because everything's in the internal database already. And because it's geocoded, I don't have to really do anything to find a local repeater. Or if I go to Birmingham, GPS says, okay, you're in Birmingham. Here's the closest repeaters to you. And I select a repeater, I can talk. So it makes getting on the air and not having to worry about programming different. This is where I usually make the comment, and it's a snide remark about DMR, so I say it with tongue in cheek. I used to say there's one person in the state of Georgia that knows how to program a DMR radio, and then everybody else copies their code plug, it's called. It's not quite that bad, but this is a whole lot simpler than out of the box starting with DMR. So that's an advantage I'll say that D-Star has. There are a lot of people who will always do those code plugs, and you say, hey, I need a code plug for this area, and somebody's got it. I can drop it in the radio. Bob? Have you seen this presentation? I'm going to skip ahead. You can update your memories. Why would I do that? I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The current generation of D-Star radios, they come preloaded, as I said, with an internal international database of repeaters. Now that data is dated. I know where they get the data. They get it from dstarinfo.com. So the current generation, every time a new model of radio comes out, ICOM will ask D-Star Info, give me a list of the repeaters. And so a new model radio comes out and it'll have a very current list, but you can customize that quite a bit. So what I would say is if you have owned a D-Star radio for quite a while and you have not updated your memories, and I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. It's actually pretty simple to do. So you would want to update that, and that gives you a more current list, any repeaters that have come on the air since that time. Some may have gone away, and that'll give you a more complete list of repeaters in the area. Now, there's two good sources of information on repeater data. One is dstarinfo.com. If you haven't been to that site, go to it. Lots of good information there. The other is the RT Systems software can preload areas. Now that uses the same data from dstarinfo.com because they're very good people at RT Systems. I recommend them highly. So those are two good sources of updated repeater data, and I encourage you to do that. Here's an example of dstarinfo.com. And if you go to the site and you select the Downloads tab, kind of hard to see probably on there, but there's a Downloads tab, one of those green tabs across the upper part, and you select the type of download you want. For example, if you are a current generation of radio, it's a DR mode radio. So I would select that. Otherwise, I can just get a list near a location. I can also add some hotspot data to be included in that. And then you get another screen, and I'm going to select the type of radio that I have. First, I'll put in my coordinates, and that's going to say, okay, centered around this location. And I'll put in Latin long for that. And you can just ballpark it and say 3484 or something, minus 84. And that'll get you in the ballpark. Then I'm going to select the type of radio, the model of radio. Here I've selected an IC 705. Why do I care about what radio? Because different radios have different size memories. Some of the early radios have less than the later ones. As you can see from this one, the 705, one of the latest radios, the repeater list that I can download is 2,500 lines. That's going to get quite a few of them in there. So I'm going to get that by the radio. And then do I want to leave some empty repeater slots? Ed argued with me for about a year on this and then agreed to do it because I leave some empty slots so I can program in some special things like different hotspots that I use. And then this final thing that you see on some of the radios, the later model radios, percent FM. Because in this list that comes down, D-Star Info also has access to Repeater Book through an agreement with them for FM repeaters. So I can download that list, and based on the percent FM I want, percent of that 2,500 are going to be FM versus D-Star. I can, then it will give me the 2,500 repeaters centered around the coordinates that I put in. Does that make sense? So I can update my memories with what I want there. Yes. Yeah. When I say percent FM, percent analog repeaters, because that list is going to give me both FM and D-Star repeaters, unless I say 0% FM. Yeah. Remember, every radio can do FM and D-Star. And so the nearest repeater function also works with FM. So, for example, I don't have to program the GARS repeater. It's in that database. And if I said, give me nearest repeater, I can say, do I want all repeaters? And that would be D-Star and FM. Do I want D-Star only? Do I want FM only? And it will give me that list. And the GARS repeater 147075 is going to be in there. So what that's going to give me, Steve? Shame on you. Right. Okay. Good question. And I'll show you that where I skipped over with to get to Bob's question about updating repeaters. I'll go back to that and I'll show you how you do that in DR mode. The old method is it's similar to DMR in that you could take one of your memories and each memory did a different thing. Like if I wanted to link to this repeater, link to that repeater, link to this one, do an unlink, do an ID function, whatever it may be, they would take up different memory slots for that, and you'd have to program each one of those. During the early days of D-Star, that was a little tedious to do that, and scared some people um, to learn how to do that. Now let me back up here and let's talk about DR mode. It's the easiest to use. Like we were talking about, the current generation of radios, they really have two sets of memories. One of your regular memories that you would just program in for FM, you program in frequency, offset, direction, tone if needed. That's in there. For the repeater list, you're going to see some output of that when I update the memories. It comes out as a CSV file, and it's got all that information in there as well, but also has the location, the geocoded location. So the easiest thing to do is I'm going to press DR. That gives you a screen like this. What you'll see is there's a to and a from. Here's what those mean. The from tells me where I'm going to transmit to. In this case, I'm transmitting to the Lawrenceville repeater, WD4STRB, which is the UHF one. And so I've selected that. So when I transmit, the from tells me where I'm going to go. The to tells me, okay, what do I want to do when I get there? The simplest thing is it'll say use repeater or use reflector, CQ, CQ, CQ. That's my normal talk thing. So if I just want to talk, that's fine. Now, let me give you another little piece of information. If a repeater is already linked to a certain reflector, and you talk on that repeater that's linked, you go with it. So for example, if you get on the Stone Mountain repeater on the 2-meter version, it's linked to reflector 3 alpha, the statewide network. So if I transmit with use repeater or use reflector CQ, CQ, CQ into Stone Mountain on the from, then I'm going to go out on that statewide network, wherever that repeater is connected, what reflector. So, but I can change that. I can unlink Stone Mountain from that reflector and link it somewhere else. And I can do that from my radio without having to do anything else. So I'll get Steve on another Saturday morning breakfast. And in 5 minutes, I'll have him using DR mode again. It's amazing to me. I usually do a D-Star forum at Hemvention every year. And one of the first questions I'll ask is, how many people with a D-Star radio use DR mode? And only about half the room will say, raise their hand. And I've never understood why. Yeah, I do, because I was reluctant very first when DR mode became available to use it myself. But it is so easy, and the function is so easy to do. Did you have a question? No, if it's a D-Star repeater, it is only going to operate in digital mode, in DR mode. I know there are fusion repeaters that you can set up in auto, and in DMR you can set them in mixed mode, that if you send in FM, it goes out FM, repeats it as FM, or you send it as digital, it does that. D-Star they're dedicated to D-Star. So again, just to kind of repeat, looking at this, once I go in DR mode, on from, I can go through the list of repeaters. Now I can hit from again, and it will give me a screen like this where I can select something else. I can select reflector. Now this is in 2 mode. I'm sorry, I skipped over. I can, in from mode, I can select nearest repeater, or I can go through a repeater list that's sorted by state, first by state, and then, well, by region and then by state. So I can do that repeater list, or I can select nearest repeater to cut that list down to the 10 closest ones to me. Now that's in the front, and I can select that. Okay, now I'm transmitting into that repeater. Now let's go to 2. Let's highlight the 2 section up above that. Now, what do I want to do? Do I just want to talk? So I would go reflector and then use reflector. And that sets that use repeater or use reflector CQ, 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 like you see here. Now, if I want to link to another one, I can select reflector, link to reflector, and then that's going to give me a list of them. And I can select one of those, and then that's going to change the to field to link to reflector, and then it might be 012 Charlie. And when I do that, then when I key, it sends that command to the repeater to link to that reflector. Bob. No. Well, different models, they said different things. Early on, they said use repeater. Now I think it says use reflector. They're the same thing. What you want to avoid, and here's a common downfall of someone just getting into D-Star. I'll take this example right here. And I curse ICOM every time I say this, because out of the box on the to field, when you select to field for the first time on D-Star radio, it comes up local CQ. See that top one on the list? That means I'm only going to transmit on my local repeater. I'm not going out the gateway, and I'm not going to go to any reflector that it may be connected to. I don't know how many times I've heard 2 people on the same repeater. Now I'm on a different repeater that's linked in, but I only hear one side of the conversation, because one guy has his radio set for use repeater or use reflector, either one, and the other guy has it on local CQ. And by default, an ICOM radio comes up local CQ. Change that. One of the first things you do when you get that radio. I'm not going to go into gateway CQ right now. That's a totally different thing. Just think of a reflector as what you're linking to. That's the conference bridge. You might have, because you moved the repeater over to that. So a common courtesy is, I want to move to reflector 12 Charlie. Does anybody have a problem with that? Just a common courtesy. It's almost like, is the repeater in use? And someone will ask that, because I can send this command without sending any voice. Once I key with link to reflector, it's going to do its thing. So a common courtesy is to ask, because you are going to move that whole repeater over to a different reflector. In a hotspot, it's a different story. You're the only one there. That's you. Steve? Unfortunately, this is one of those things that depends. If I am talking on a repeater, I need to unlink it before I link to the next one, which you see unlink as one of the choices there. Now, hotspots are a different animal. They got smart on the hotspots, and I can just say link to this one, then I can just say link to that one, and it'll do it. You don't have to unlink before. But if you're going through a repeater, you do need to unlink before you link. Good question. Good question. What happens? A couple of situations. I drive out of the area and I didn't put the repeater back where it was. There's some software running on 99% of the repeaters called Monlink. It's, again, one of those third-party applications that was written for this. Monlink does several things for you. One, it allows you to set a default reflector. And so that's what most of the repeaters in Georgia do. The repeaters in Southern California set it as reflector 012 Charlie. Georgia, we set them all to 003 alpha. So what happens is after a period of idle time, nobody's talking, the repeater reverts back to that default reflector. So that allows you, I forgot to move it back. I just didn't care and didn't move it back, or I drove out of the area or got into a weak signal area and I couldn't move it back. Leave it alone. In about 10 minutes it's of no activity, it's going to revert back. Good question. Well, think of a conference bridge as having three different sections. Each one is like a different reflector in the same box. It's a server. So we we call those A, B, and C. There can actually be a D and an E as well. But the significance on those doesn't mean anything. It just says it's a different one. So on the same reflector server that's located in Dallas, Texas for reflector 3, there's you can be reflector 3 alpha, Bravo, or Charlie, but it's the same box. But they act like three separate reflectors. Now, what you'll see different also when you look at a call sign on a repeater, it may generally say either it have a like it may say WB4QDX space B or space C. Now that nomenclature refers to the repeaters themselves, and C typically means 2 meters, B means UHF 70 centimeters. So don't mean to kind of throw a confusion in there, but the reflectors just that's a unique part of it, A, B, or C usually. For the repeaters, it tells you that C is normally configured as a VHF, B as UHF. Was there another question? The reflector, it doesn't matter. It just says A, B, or C. That is correct. On the repeater, it does. Yeah, yeah. But once you know it, most people don't worry about because the repeater is set up for someone else. And you see what the frequency is. It's just the same nomenclature that says C is going to be a 2 meter and B is usually going to be a 70 centimeter. You don't really need to worry about that because the frequency's programmed in. Okay, another question. No, but I can tell you how to do that. You see on this, once I'm selecting in the to field here, reflector, and then the bottom choice is repeater information. The very bottom one on the lower screen on the right says repeater information. That sends what's called an I command. And when I select repeater information and then I key, it says, tell me what you're linked to. And the repeater will come back in voice and or scroll on the bottom level of your screen. It may say connected to or linked to REF 003 alpha. And it may even announce that voice. So that's how you can tell. Any other questions? I'm, well, I can do everything I want in DR mode with only a couple of clicks, as opposed to having to know I need to go to memory 23 if I want to unlink on this repeater itself. So, I mean, what do you do when you're driving anyway? How often can anybody say it's real easy to change stuff when you're driving? Yeah, yeah, you can do that. Echo test is kind of like echo test on Echolink. If I put on echo test and then I transmit, I can say test at WB4QDX testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, release. It'll play that back to me. So I can tell either my voice quality Am I solid into the repeater? I'm not dropping out any. Kind of like Parrot. Yeah. It's exactly like Parrot is on DMR. It goes to the repeater. Any other questions? All right, we covered that. Covered that. All right, I talked about updating the memories. If I'm going to D-Star Info, I put in all that information, what radio I have, what percent FM, what my coordinates are. This is the output. It's a CSV file, and I can read that in Excel or whatever. So you can see it's got all the information in. As I go further over to the right, you even see coordinates for Latin long. So that's the geocoding that it will know using with the GPS internal to the radio, calculate the nearest repeater. So this is the output that you would get from dstarinfo.com as a CSV file. All right, now what do I want to do with that? I want to get it into the radio. There's a couple of things I can do. Number one, I can go to software and either the free ICOM software or the RT system software, which has a few more features, I can import it directly in. So I can do that. What I would select here is repeater list. As you go down the list, and this is for my 5100 mobile, go to repeater list, right click, and then it'll say import, and give it that file name, and it will import that list. So now I've got it into the software, and then I just drop that into the radio. I'll send that to the radio. I can also do it, take that SD card that's in the radio, I can pull it out, put it in my computer, and you'll see several folders. One of those folders on that pre-formatted SD card is called CSV. And I could drop that there. Back when I used to travel a lot, here's what I did. I had a couple of different files depending on centered around different points in the country. If I was going out to LA, I had a complete file centered around Los Angeles. And so I'd get off the plane out there and I would import that CSV file, and my radio now shows the 2,500 closest repeaters to LA. If I'm going to Denver, I do the same thing. So I had a list of several around the country that I could use, but you're going to get a lot of repeaters regardless. So that's two ways. Once I get it, I got it in the software, and now I'm going to download that, send it to the radio. So I would select that, it goes to the radio, and now my repeater list is updated. Any questions on that? Back of the room. It will give you it outputs a name. The name doesn't mean anything, but it'll be a .csv. So, it'll open in Excel or text files or whatever. But the only reason you would need to know the name of it is when you're importing it into the software. You have to select that file. Bob? Yes. Yeah, there is. If you look out to the very right on the file, there's Latin long. Joe? If you have GPS in your radio, most radios, in fact, all of the radios produced since 2013 have GPS. No, it does not. That was one of the first generation of radios. But you go to ID 31, 51, 52, 5100 mobile, 9700, all of those radios have built-in GPS. Did that make sense, Bob? Did Mark explain it to you? You're looking at the left side of the file. Look over to the right. Look at the header. Third from the end on the right is latitude, then longitude, and then UTC offset. See, when I download this file, when I go to d.com, I put in my Latin long. I select the radio, tells me how many memories it's going to download, and then I hit it. And it's going to give me the 2,500 closest repeaters centered around my coordinates, filtered. It's good. That list that's got, I don't know how many, 10,000 in it. It's going to select the 2,500 that are centered around my Latin long. And then it's only going to have those in there. So that file is only going to, it's a sub list of the entire list of repeaters worldwide. It doesn't overwrite those. Now, there's two ways to save and read a file, and I'll use the ICOM software because it's free. If I, let me see if I can see it here. No, I can't see it here. Depending on, I can either, if I bring in a CSV, I'm only bringing in that repeater list. I'm not touching any memories that I've manually programmed. If I bring in the entire settings and everything, that's an ICF file in ICOM language. And it brings in, it overwrites the settings you have and regular memories as well. So if you just import a CSV, you're not touching your regular memories. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? I'm skipping to the end again. On dstarinfo.com, you'll see not only a lot of tutorials, but if you look under conferences, I taught for about 7 years, except for the last 2. I've taught a class at Dayton, a 3-hour D-Star class, and we go over all this stuff. A couple of those or classes got videoed. So if you go out there, there's either PowerPoints from my old classes or videos from a couple of years in there that you can go back. And it explains the DR mode because that's been around for a while. It explains how to update repeaters, etc. So that's a source because you're not going to get everything tonight. I'm feeding you with a fire hose, right? That's always the case. But see, there's some other sites also, dstarusers.org, dstar.info, and RT Systems. Those are good resources as well. So you can do that. Now, let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about hotspots. Hotspots are a wonderful little thing. Mine's back there. It's connected, and it's set right now linked to Reflector 30 Charlie, which is one of the busiest in the world. And it's been sitting up here yakking for a while, but of course, right now, nobody's on it. But if I get on there and I throw out my call, I do this demo in the ham cram when we talk about digital modes. I'll get on one of the 2 busy ones, 30 Charlie or 1 Charlie, and I'll do this, and let me see if I can hold it down to half a dozen people responding back. This is WB4QDX. I'm giving a D-Star presentation at a ham club meeting. Could I get a couple of stations to come back with their call and their location? This is WB4QDX.
Baltimore, California, currently coming into the reflector via Starlink while driving 70 miles an hour down the highway.
Thank you very much for the California contact. Any other stations?
Mobile, currently in Georgetown, Kentucky, coming through an MMDVM hotspot, driving 18-wheeler.
Thanks for the Kentucky station. One more call, please. Hey, you heard a little R2D2 on him.
20.
Okay, there's someone who's not quite into the repeater real well. So you think he's dropping out for some reason. It's because lack of signal. And that would be the case with any of them. All right, this is WB4QDX. I appreciate all the calls. We're demonstrating D-Star at a Hem Club meeting. So appreciate all the stations. WB4QDX clear. And usually 4 or 5 will come back in there after the fact. Usually up. Brag.
He's on the windshield coming home from work, and 72 in the house. The fireplace is going, and it's that time of the year here in Wisconsin. 73 KA9SRO.
All right, turn them down. All right, that give you an example. I'm not using a repeater. I'm using that hotspot connected to the internet. You can do that with most any of the digital modes. Now, how do I program for a hotspot? Now, there's a couple of ways I can do that. Number one, I could just program it in a regular memory. But the easy way to do it would be if I put it in my repeater list. So the repeater list is going to look something like this. I can create another entry, and you see the number one on my list there is my OpenSpot Pro. I've got the call sign that is programmed in it. I've got the frequency of my hotspot. And hotspots, a lot of them, you have to program an offset, but a zero, like duplex plus or minus, but an offset of 0. I don't know why but they do that, but so they'll think it's a repeater. So I can do that, and now I can call that up in my DR mode and the from settings. Click on from. I have another category called hotspots, and then I select that. So I still haven't gone back to regular memories to do that. And that gives me the flexibility to be able to do that. One thing I told Dallas that next week, the week after the regular meeting, we kind of follow that with kind of the same topic, but a little more informal setting. So I'll be here next Tuesday night. If you've got a D-Star radio you want to program, if you bring a laptop, whatever you want to do, we'll play around. We'll help you program, help you answer more questions. So can do that tomorrow or next Tuesday night as well if you're interested. I updated the CSV file. I just added another line and for the hotspot. And that let me do that. Well, any hotspot needs programming. You need to put your call sign in a hotspot. And depending on the type of hotspot, you may have some extra programming that you have to do. Question back here. Which? The hotspot? Hotspots vary in price from about $150 to $160. The OpenSpot 4 is one of the ones they're more proud of. It's a little over $300. And the only reason I bought it, I resisted a long time in buying it, but when I was teaching the class in Dayton the first year about hotspots, I wanted to get some knowledge of that, so I broke down and spent the $350 for the OpenSpot Pro. It's a very good hotspot. It's made by a bunch of guys in Ukraine. They included a feature in the OpenSpot Pro 4. Make sure I got that right. it has what's called a transcoding feature. Now, what does that give you? Transcoding would allow you to go in with a DMR radio. It will transcode that over to the D-Star protocol and come out D-Star on a D-Star repeater that you would select. Same thing. I can take a D-Star radio, transcode to DMR or Fusion, and that way I don't have to have a D-Star radio to get on D-Star if I've got a DMR radio or a Fusion radio. So the one thing that some of the hotspots have done, and the OpenSpot Pro 4 does that. Most of them do not have transcoding. Are there any other hotspots that do, Mark? I don't think any others do. Yeah. Mark, it does it. Yeah. They started putting the transcoding, as Mark says, in the OpenSpot 3. And so there's been different versions that come out. Right. There's a standard that's been developed out there, as he says, MMDVM. And I won't try to repeat what it means again, but there's kind of a standard for that out there. What it's really done is bridge the gap that where the Japanese manufacturers kind of got picky. I'm not going to do his stuff. I'm only going to do mine. That allows you to only have one radio and go across several modes on that. Yeah. Yeah, you can. You could do that. I always want to include this because here's where we get ourselves in trouble. Not intentionally, usually, but we do. If you are running a hotspot, if you are running more than one hotspot, you should only have one hotspot powered up at a time. And also, you should never have two hotspots powered up running on the same frequency. What happens is they both are competing with each other. And let's say you have one hotspot linked to this reflector, you have this hotspot linked to another reflector. What you've done is essentially bridge those reflectors. People have done that, and the two busiest reflectors in the world have been from time to time linked together. You want to talk about a cluster, that is it. So I'll say that with very strong words. Never have two hotspots running on the same frequency, and the best way to avoid that is never power up more than one at a time. Would you all agree with that? No matter what it is? I know. Well, I've got 6 or 8 different hotspots I've collected over time, but I still follow this rule because I've seen what happens when you don't. That's right. That's right. That's right. So I'll just caution you there. There are a couple of new D-Star radios coming out, and I'm going to close out here. ICOM has announced at Tokyo Ham Fair back in August. They're coming out with a new mobile. This will basically replace the 5100. They go with the color touchscreen, lots of nice features, good looking radio. I have indirectly, informally, and has not been confirmed that it's going to have a KISS TNC in it. Because people are asking that question. This radio display was shown in Tokyo. And if you look on the right side of the radio, 146895, right above that, you can't see it's a little blurry, but it says KISS FM. I'm not talking about an FM broadcast station in Los Angeles. So rumors are, and not confirmed, that it's going to have that KISS TNC in it. Kenwood is probably going to be the next radio out. It's due anytime. It'll probably be available for Hamcation, the TMD 750A. This is a great looking radio. One of the great features that the Kenwood D-Star radios has, it also does APRS. And a lot of people like that feature. Very good quality radio. They're going to look a lot alike, but a new generation of mobiles, touch screens, color screens, nice looking screens. So I'm sure I'll probably have to get one of these. I don't know which one. Yes, sir. TNC is terminal node controller. And that is, you've seen like these, what's the model number? A TNC was first developed to do packet. It's basically like a packet modem. So it takes data from your radio and converts it to the tones. So that's what a TNC does. A signal link serves the purpose of a TNC. Same thing. It will generate those, but it has like its own built-in sound card. Good question. All right. You saw this. Make a note of these sites. Lots of good information out there. There's groups.io groups. No matter what model radio you have, you can join that group as well. I'll just open up. Any final questions? I know you've been chomping at the bits. Go ahead, Mark. Well,
DMR, like you mentioned before, has encodes everybody's has a number. It's a number-based system, and there's a registry that goes along with that, where everybody who uses DMR has to register. And it's volunteer, but they've done an incredible job worldwide of maintaining this database. There's like 290,000, almost 300,000 IDs in there that all been verified and whatnot. And so DMR and the hotspots and the repeaters and well, the repeaters don't have to do this, but the hotspots do this. Is the call comes in and it looks up in that database, because you download that database into the hotspot, and then it displays that on your hotspot. You can also load that database into your handheld, and it will convert the numbers into a call sign, so you can see that on the little display. Along with that information, of course, is not just a registering of your call sign, but it's also your name and your location and some other information too that you can correlate with it. I know in some cases has been used to track down people who are been causing problems, because they know exactly where they are by looking them up in the database. D-Star, when I registered for it, all it needed was my call sign. It didn't verify that I was actually a valid ham. I didn't have to send my license or anything like that. I just gave it a call sign. And so what happens is in this cross-modal situation, D-Star, if a D-Star call sign comes across and gets translated with a gateway over into the DMR, all I see is a call sign. I don't know who it is.
Right.
So my question is there any push to come up with a registry that's more robust like the DMR on the D-Star side?
The short answer is I'm not aware of one. I agree with you. And by the way, I do all three digital modes. Obviously, my favorite is D-Star, but I'm not going to badmouth any one of them because they're all very good. And I encourage people to try one or the other or all of them. That is a very good feature in that when I'll go back to the early days of DMR. There was like a central source, wasn't it, DMR Mark, that issued radio IDs.
Yeah.
They were there. These were a lot of Motorola shop employees who were also hams. And that's basically what brought DMR into this country, which was a good thing. Hams experiment with stuff. So that's expanded a lot. And as DMR has evolved, like Mark says, they include more than that information. I will also say that D-Star has evolved further also. One of the big problems we had in the early days of D-Star was you registered on a local repeater. Well, everybody wants their own local repeater. Now, there may only be you and one other person on it on a good day, but there's some responsibility that goes along with that to verify call signs. Was that all done to start with? No, probably not. What changed on that is because people wanted to have a D-Star repeater and then somebody would register on their repeater and then they'd never get an answer back. What was created was called a national, or actually a worldwide registration database for D-Star. And if you go out to registration or regist.dstargateway.org, that's where you set up to request to register your call sign. Now, there is a team of people that respond to that, usually within an hour or so. They are verifying your call sign by several methods. They are not collecting other information other than your email address, so that if they do need to get in touch with you, they at least have your email address. Can you change your email address? Sure. People do that. So DMR is good that they have put a lot more information in that.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. But the whole thing has evolved quite a bit, no matter what the mode is. You're seeing changes all the time.
Yeah, with
question.
with DMR, there's a number of different digital networks, but the registry part of it is a completely separate organization.
Mhm.
And sometimes you see somebody putting a request into the Brandmeister group about fixing their call sign, and they said, no, you need to go over to radioid.net and whatnot.
Right. Right.
But
That has evolved.
But they have a list that you can download, and then you can correlate that with.
Mhm.
You can use it not only in your handhelds and in your hotspots, but you can use that with. I've done some programming where I generate reports from the call logs and whatnot, and I can look up the ID and say,
Right.
yeah, I've got all these people from Georgia, and I got all these people from Alabama, and all.
I
this
remember in the early days of DMR, and I was like the 45th person in Georgia to register a DMR call it, because I'm like, what is it, 3113045 is my DMR ID. And I remember some of the early radios limited the number, like you would have to manually program in that contact list, which translated from radio ID to a call sign. You had to manually program it in. Over time, that's evolved. You can download files, and now you can. It's a heck of a lot easier to do. But also one thing to remember in that is when you transmit, what goes over the air? That radio ID, not your call sign.
Right.
Where in D-Star, and I think also in Fusion, your call sign goes with you, and that can satisfy identification requirements per FCC. Any other questions?
I take it also that in D-Star you don't have to do what you do in the amateur or the analog world, and it's kind of an annoyance, I know, in the DMR world, where you get somebody that comes on and goes, Kerchunk, this is Kerchunk, this is blah 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 blah. Yeah,
There's still
you're already
people that-
there. They already the network already
know.
knows who you are, so you don't really need to.
Yeah, that's very frustrating for me, and I hear that on D-Star nets as well as analog nets.
Okay.
And you're correct; it's totally unnecessary. Mark. What Mark's referring to, you remember the show Last Man Standing? Tim Allen, well, I met one of the producers for that, John Amadeo, N9JA. He was a ham. Tim Allen said he wanted the show, since he was featuring like an outdoorsy type thing, to feature ham radio. So if you notice in the series, there were like 8 seasons of it. There was over in the corner, there was a station. Had ICOM donated some equipment for it. That was an actual operating station. And what they would do, and I had the privilege of going out and operating that station on the set, not during the show. But you could actually go out and operate because they had antennas on the roof. They had an HF antenna on the roof. They had a dual band antenna on the roof. Now we were operating on an ID 5100. We had promoted that we would be on reflector 30 Bravo at that time. That's where Georgia used to be, on 30 Bravo. So we advertised that we would be operating during this window from the set of Last Man Standing, and we used their call, which was KA6 LMS, an actual club station, because a lot of the crew got licensed, which was kind of neat. Tim Allen too, and the kid that played his older grandson. In fact, the night we were there, he had not gotten his license yet, the grandson. And my wife is sitting over across, if you remember Tim Allen or Mike Baxter's office, across the room from his desk in the shack was a couch. So my wife's sitting over there. And how we got to operate was they rehearse on Monday. Tuesday during the day, they do rehearsal on the set. Well, Monday they do a read through. Tuesday they do rehearsal on the set. Then they take about a 3-hour break for meals in the afternoon. And during that time, John Amadeo would allow people to come in and operate. And every mode has been operated on that set. And we've done a couple of D-Star activations there as well. So for 3 hours, I got to operate there, and Ed was with me as well. But my wife's over there waving on the side. Like, what do you want? She said, he wants to get on the air. Well, that was the actor that played his grandson. Said he wants to get on. Bring him over. So he got on with me, and everybody loved talking to him, not me. And we had a great time. I've got a video of that sometime if somebody's interested in it, but it's got our activation from the set of Last Man Standing. That was the experience of a lifetime.
Can we expect to see anything new or different from D-Star in the next few years, or will most of the development come from third-party developers doing hotspot
Other
things
than
and-
the new radios, there's always people writing third-party applications for it. If you look at a typical D-Star repeater, there is the base ICOM gateway software or some other base software on there, and then there's 6 or 7 utilities, third-party written utilities. One of them I mentioned, Monlink. Monlink does some other things too. It will do time announcements or net announcements. You can schedule them in to do that. There's another program on there that is written called D Plus Report. And I've used that. I used to be net control occasionally for was the Southeast D-Star repeater network. And so we went from Texas up into Virginia on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, and we would have check-ins. And we would have typically about 75 people check in on a night. Well, I could use D Plus Report, and I never picked up a pencil or a pen to be net control. And I had a complete list of all the stations checking, because once you key up, that call sign would come up. And so I see all the call signs that come up, and the first time they key up, their call sign is underlined. It also sorted by the repeater that they're coming in on, or reflector. Once I acknowledge those stations, I hit Control Z, it removes the underlines. Then I say, okay, next group of stations, quick key now. And that's what they would do, is just key for about a second. Their call sign would come through. I could see it on the list. That's a neat feature. And you hear we coined the term quick key so that you could quickly ID, and a lot of nets use that. Yeah. It's not unique to D-Star. We started it on D-Star. I will say that. Anyway, I like all of them. Like I said, I'm more partial. I do operate all of them, but I'm partial to D-Star for a couple of reasons. One of the key things I'm involved in is emergency communications, and I can do voice and data. I can send files. I can do a lot of things with that. So to me, that's a very useful function, and therefore that's a feature I like. But I do all of them. They're all good. You're never going to hear me say anything bad about them because they're all very good, robust technologies. Well, to be legal, yes. Most of the radios, as Mark said, have that contact list in it. So it's going to translate and you're going to see it, see their call sign, but it does not satisfy the legal requirement. Is that correct? Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. All right. Yes, that is true. All right. If that's all, I'll shut up. I'll sit down and shut up. Thank you all. Come back next week if you want to play with some radios and do some programming.